Your grandmother never needed a spreadsheet to know if she could afford dinner. She didn't track her spending in an app. She didn't sync her bank account to a cloud-based algorithm. She didn't receive push notifications warning her that she was $3 over her coffee budget for the month. And yet, somehow, she made it work. She raised kids. She paid the rent. She even saved money. How is that possible in a world where we're told that without artificial intelligence and machine learning and predictive analytics, we're all just one impulse purchase away from financial ruin? The answer is uncomfortable, because it suggests that everything we've been sold about modern money management might be a solution to a problem that didn't exist until the solution was invented. This is the story of how budgeting died and became a subscription service. Let me take you back to a world that feels impossible now. A world where money had weight, not metaphorical weight, actual, physical weight. Where a dollar bill wasn't a number on a screen, but a piece of paper that passed from hand to hand, accumulating the fingerprints of everyone who'd ever needed it. Where spending money required a decision, a physical act, the opening of a wallet and the surrendering of something tangible. It's 1953. A factory worker in Detroit finishes his shift at the Ford plant. It's Friday, payday. He doesn't log into a mobile banking app to check if his direct deposit cleared. He walks to the payroll office and a woman behind a cage hands him an envelope. Inside that envelope is cash, bills, the entire week's labor converted into paper he can hold. He knows exactly how much is in there because he knows exactly how much he makes. $62 for the week, every week. No variance, no algorithms determining his worth. No dynamic pricing models adjusting his compensation based on market conditions he doesn't understand. On his way home, he stops at the corner store. He needs bread, milk, eggs, and coffee. The total comes to $4.35. He hands over a $5 bill. The clerk gives him back 2 quarters, a dime, and a nickel. He can feel the money leaving his possession. He can feel himself getting lighter. $62 is now $57.65. He doesn't need an app to tell him this. His wallet is thinner. The math is unavoidable. This is not nostalgia. This is mechanics. The physical properties of cash created a natural friction in the spending process. Every purchase required a small ritual of loss. You had to open your wallet, count out the bills, hand them to another human being, and receive less than you gave. Your brain processed this as pain, mild pain, but pain nonetheless. And pain is an excellent teacher. The envelope method wasn't invented by a financial guru with a podcast and a course to sell. It was invented by necessity, by people who understood that money invisible is money spent. Women in the 1930s would cash their husband's paycheck and immediately divide the bills into different envelopes: rent, food, utilities, savings. Each envelope was a physical boundary. When the food envelope was empty, you stopped buying food. Not because an app told you to, because there was no more food money. The constraint was real. You couldn't overspend the food budget and borrow from next month's food budget because next month's food budget didn't exist yet. It was still in the future, still locked inside the hours your husband would work next week at the textile mill or the coal mine or the shipyard. You couldn't swipe a card and let the bank spot you the difference. You couldn't finance a grocery run. This system sounds primitive to us now, barbaric even. And maybe it was. But it had one feature that every modern budgeting app in the world is desperately trying to replicate. It worked automatically. You didn't need discipline. You didn't need willpower. You just needed to accept reality. The cash was finite. When it was gone, it was gone. Somewhere in the archives of financial history, buried in the dry academic papers that no one reads, there's a study from 1972. Researchers wanted to understand spending behavior. They divided participants into 2 groups. One group was given cash and told to buy whatever they wanted from a selection of items. The second group was given the equivalent amount in credit, a card they could use to charge purchases, with the promise that they'd settle up at the end of the experiment. The results were predictable to anyone who'd ever carried cash, and shocking to the economists who still believed humans were rational actors. The credit group spent 47% more than the cash group. Same people, same items, same amount of buying power, but the mechanism of payment changed everything. When you hand someone cash, your brain lights up the same regions associated with physical pain. When you swipe a card, those regions stay dark. The transaction feels costless, painless, almost like it isn't happening at all. The credit card companies knew this long before the scientists proved it. They knew it in the 1950s when they first started issuing cards. They knew it when they lobbied restaurants to accept plastic. They knew it when they convinced department stores that the 2% processing fee was worth it because people with credit cards spent more, tipped more, bought more, always more. But the real turning point, the moment when the old system died and the new system took over, wasn't the invention of the credit card. It was the invention of the rewards program. It's 1987. American Airlines launches A-Advantage, the first frequent flyer program. The pitch is simple. Fly with us, earn points, get free trips. On the surface, it's a loyalty program. But underneath, it's something more sinister. It's the gamification of spending, the conversion of money into points, and points into prizes, and prizes into the illusion that spending is earning. Within 5 years, every credit card company in America has a rewards program. Points, cash back, miles. Suddenly, paying with cash isn't just old-fashioned, it's stupid. You're leaving money on the table, free money, 2% back on groceries, 5% back on gas, a free flight to Hawaii if you just spend $15,000 in the next 12 months. Do you see what happened there? The pain of spending was replaced with the pleasure of earning. The transaction inverted. Buying things became a way to get things. The card became a tool, a lever, a hack. And if you were smart, if you were responsible, if you played the game correctly, you could come out ahead. Except you couldn't, because the house always wins. The math is inescapable. Credit card companies don't offer rewards out of generosity. They offer rewards because they know that people who chase rewards spend more than they earn back. The 2% cash back is bait. The real money is in the 83% of cardholders who carry a balance, who pay interest, who finance their rewards with money they don't have. But we tell ourselves we're different. We're the smart ones. We pay off our balance every month. We never pay interest. We're beating the system. And maybe you are. Maybe you're the exception. But the existence of exceptions doesn't disprove the rule. The rule is that invisible money gets spent faster than visible money. The rule is that friction prevents waste. The rule is that your grandmother's envelope system worked because it made spending hurt. Let me tell you about a woman named Ethel. She's not famous. You won't find her in history books. But her story is the story of 10 million women just like her. It's 1942. Ethel's husband is overseas, fighting in the Pacific. She's alone in a small apartment in Philadelphia with 2 kids under 5. She works part-time at a munitions factory, filling shells with powder, breathing air that tastes like metal. She makes $18 a week. Rent is $12 a month. That's $3 a week. She puts 3 $1 bills in an envelope labeled rent every Friday. By the end of the month, she has $12 in that envelope, and she takes it to the landlord and hands it to him, and he marks her ledger as paid. Food is harder to calculate because it varies, but she budgets $7 a week. That's another envelope. Every day, before she goes to the market, she takes the money she needs out of the food envelope. If tomatoes are cheaper this week, the leftover money stays in the envelope, a cushion against the week when tomatoes are expensive. Utilities, another $1 a week. Clothing, 50 cents. Savings, if there's anything left, goes into a coffee can hidden in the back of the cupboard. This system requires no math beyond addition and subtraction. It requires no financial literacy. It requires no understanding of compound interest or asset allocation or tax-advantaged retirement accounts. It just requires honesty. The honesty to look at an empty envelope and say, I can't afford that. The beauty of Ethel's system, the thing that made it nearly impossible to fail, was that failure required active sabotage. You had to physically steal from one envelope to fund another. You had to take the rent money and spend it on food, knowing full well that you were robbing your future self. That knowledge, that visceral understanding of the trade-off, acted as a brake. Now compare that to the way we budget today. You open an app, the app connects to your bank account. It downloads your transactions. It categorizes your spending using machine learning algorithms trained on data from 10 million other users. It shows you colorful graphs. It sends you notifications. It tells you that you've spent 83% of your dining out budget and you're only halfway through the month. And then what? What stops you from going out to dinner anyway? Nothing physical, no empty envelope, no missing bills, just a number in an app that you can close and ignore. The constraint is imaginary. The pain is theoretical. And so you go to dinner, and you swipe your card, and the app updates the graph, and the number goes red, and you feel a tiny twinge of guilt that evaporates the moment the food arrives. The app didn't fail. You didn't fail. The system failed, because the system was designed to fail. Because a system that actually prevented you from overspending would be a system that prevented the credit card company from making money. And the credit card company makes the app, or sponsors it, or buys data from it, or profits from it in ways so complex and abstract that you'd need a forensic accountant to trace the connections. Let's talk about the villain in this story. Not a person, not even a company. The villain is abstraction. Money used to be a physical object. Then it became a number in a ledger. Then it became a number on a screen. Then it became a number that updates automatically, in real time, across multiple devices synchronized with the cloud. At each stage of abstraction, money became easier to spend and harder to understand. When money was gold, you couldn't spend gold you didn't have. When money was paper, you could write a check, but the check would bounce if the money wasn't there. When money was plastic, you could charge purchases and pay later, but you still received a physical bill in the mail, a piece of paper that demanded your attention. Now money is light, photons on a screen. You can send it with a tap. You can spend it without thinking. You can lose track of it completely and not realize it until the app, the algorithm, the artificial intelligence tells you that something is wrong. We outsourced our awareness. We delegated the job of knowing how much money we have to machines that have no incentive to help us save. And then we act surprised when we're broke. Here's the part where I'm supposed to offer you a solution. A simple trick, a hack, a way to beat the system using the system's own tools against it. But I don't have one, because the solution isn't a trick, it's a return, a regression to something we've been taught to see as backwards. The solution is cash, not as a novelty, not as a budgeting exercise you try for a month and then abandon, but as a primary operating system, as the default mode, as the thing you use for most of your spending most of the time. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds impossible in a world where half the stores don't even have cash registers anymore, where parking meters take cards, where your landlord wants rent via direct deposit. I know it sounds like I'm asking you to live in the past. But humor me for a moment. Imagine you withdrew your monthly spending money in cash. Not all your money, just the variable stuff. Groceries, gas, entertainment, dining out. Let's say it's $1,500. You take $1,500 out of the ATM and you divide it into envelopes, or jars, or boxes, whatever works. $300 for groceries, $200 for gas, $200 for eating out, $100 for entertainment, $700 for miscellaneous, the category that always explodes. Now you live off those envelopes for a month. When you buy groceries, You take money from the grocery envelope. When the grocery envelope is empty, you stop buying groceries the fancy way and you start buying groceries the cheap way. Rice, beans, pasta, the stuff that stretches. What changes? Everything changes. Because the constraint is real again. The money is finite. The trade-offs are visible. Spending becomes a physical act that your brain processes as loss. You will spend less. Not because you have more discipline, not because you're trying harder, but because the system itself creates resistance. Cash is heavy. Cash is bulky. Cash requires planning. You can't impulse buy something online at 2 in the morning if the money is sitting in an envelope in your kitchen drawer. The credit card companies know this. The banks know this. The payment processors know this. That's why they're so desperate to kill cash. They call it progress. They call it convenience. They call it security. And it is all those things. But it's also a way to make spending frictionless. And frictionless spending is spending that never stops. There's a term in psychology called hyperbolic discounting. It means we value immediate rewards more than future rewards, even when the future rewards are objectively better. $100 today feels more valuable than $200 next year. This is why we save less than we should. This is why we overspend. This is why we finance furniture and carry credit card balances and lease cars we can't afford. Cash doesn't fix hyperbolic discounting, but it makes it harder to indulge, because when you have to hand over physical money, the immediate pain of loss competes with the immediate pleasure of acquisition. The transaction becomes a negotiation between two parts of your brain instead of a frictionless surrender to impulse. Your grandmother understood this instinctively. She didn't need a study to tell her that cash spending hurt more than credit spending. She felt it. Every time she opened her purse and counted out bills, she felt the weight of the decision. And that weight, that friction, that pain, it saved her. It kept her housed. It kept her fed. It kept her out of debt in a world where debt was still considered shameful, where bankruptcy meant failure, where you didn't finance a lifestyle you couldn't afford because the financing didn't exist. We've built a world where the tools that helped people survive have been replaced with tools that help corporations profit, and we call it innovation. We call it disruption. We call it the future. But the future looks a lot like 1953 if you squint. People working full-time and still struggling to pay rent. People drowning in debt they can't escape. People living paycheck to paycheck, despite making more money than their grandparents could have imagined. The difference is that in 1953, people knew they were poor. They could see it. They could count it. Now we're poor in ways we don't understand. Poor despite the apps and the algorithms and the budgeting tools that promise to make us rich. So what's the answer? Go back to cash? Delete the apps? Cut up the credit cards? Maybe. For some of you. For the ones who are drowning and don't know why. For the ones who look at their bank account every month and wonder where the money went. For the ones who feel like they're doing everything right and still falling behind. Because the truth is, the game is rigged. The system is designed to separate you from your money as efficiently as possible. And the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing. Use cash. Not all the time. Not for everything. But for the things that bleed you dry. For the categories where you always overspend. For the purchases you can't track. Feel the money leaving your hand. Feel the wallet getting lighter. Let your brain process the pain of spending. Let the empty envelope be the answer when you want something you can't afford. It's not sophisticated. It's not innovative. It's not going to get featured in a TechCrunch article about revolutionary fintech solutions. But it works. It worked for your grandmother. It worked for millions of people who never needed an algorithm to tell them they were broke. And it'll work for you if you're willing to admit that sometimes the old ways were better. That sometimes progress is a lie sold to you by people who profit from your confusion. That sometimes the solution to a modern problem is an ancient answer. The cash era wasn't perfect. It was harder. It was slower. It required planning and discipline and the ability to accept limits. But it was honest. The money was real. The constraints were real. The choices were real. And maybe that's what we've lost in the algorithm era. Not just the cash, but the honesty. The clear-eyed understanding of what we have and what we don't. The ability to look at an empty envelope and say no. Your grandmother never needed a spreadsheet to know if she could afford dinner. She just needed to look in her purse. Maybe it's time we learned to do the same.